So here we are at our last session of the idea of the world. It's been a while. February 11th was the first session that we had. We're now in May, so it's been a fairly long journey. I found it's been an enjoyable one. And then the focus of this last session itself is, like I mentioned on the webpage that I set up for this, is kind of twofold. One of them is to look at the back matter, which is the last parts of materials that we haven't looked at yet. This is kind of like the analog to the front matter. We've looked at the 10 articles that Bernardo wrote and had published and that present his case for his idealist ontology. But at the end of everything, he's got to sum that up, because that was the purpose of creating a book to begin with, that it had a beginning, middle, and end. And so we spent most of the time in the middle, but the end comes around too. And in the back of the book, there were two additional sections that were of interest. One of them was a brief afterword by Edward Kelly, who's at the University of Virginia and does a lot of, I think, very, very fine research into what are most likely or most often considered anomalous phenomena like near-death experiences, reincarnation, telekinesis, all of those things that nobody wants to talk about. They're taking a very serious look at down there, which is very encouraging. And he wrote an afterword where he more or less combines or takes a look at how far apart or close together these days are science and spirituality. And then there was an appendix about consciousness after death that wasn't included in the main volume, even though it was published previously. But since it was a requested article, it was a guest commentary that he wrote for publication. He didn't include it in the main body of the text. So I kind of like to handle the two blocks, not in a cut and dried fashion, of course. That would be too Germanic. So we can we have Wagner was mentioned, in our preliminary comment. So we don't want to get on the Wagnerian path. But if there's anything about the back matter that struck anyone, that would be the first place to start. And then we want to get to a recap or to a discussion, which I think is probably the more interesting part. Is, okay, well, where does this leave us, or where are we now? Or as John phrased before we actually went on live here, so what do we know now that we didn't know before? And I'll add the little comment for each of us individually. Was it worth it? Was there enough gain there, or was there too much pain, or was there, you can get to the end and be disappointed. You can get to the end and be satisfied. You can get to the end and be excited. All of those are possible. I can say, for one, since I read the book twice, once prompted me to request that the rest of you who are interested and have shown up, which I greatly appreciate over the course of the sessions that we've had, to talk about this. So my reaction to the ending is, of course, different the second time around, but that's to be expected as well. So I just like to open up the floor for whomever has anything that they want to bring up now in this regard. So
I'd like to just make one comment. It's not going to be a long one. I wish I would have read the end before I read the rest of the book. But I'm not disappointed. It just, I felt that when I did read it, I'm going, oh yeah, okay. It doesn't necessarily change anything, but it really, I appreciated the ending because it really expanded the tone of what he was trying to do from my perspective or experience.
That's an interesting observation. we don't generally read novels that way, because we want to we want to find out who done it, and not just find out who done it. But we're all trying to get along with that. But when it comes to academic writing itself, if you know, a good abstract actually is a spoiler alert. It tells you what's in the what's coming, and in a sense, you could have read the back matter first, you know, and it's just something to keep in mind in the future for things like this. Well, why not just go to the end and see how he sums it up? And because one of the other things that you can do is find out, well, did he really get there? Because that's also a question that comes up. I mean, did he get to that point at the end where he's satisfied with his wrap up? You know, is he actually delivered on what he had promised? So
Yeah,
it's always an option, but I find the observation interesting that you.
yeah, it was one of those interesting things that it had a mix of excitement and oh shit. It was a mix of both. But yeah, thank you.
I'm responding, Ed, to a question that you asked about what further consequences has your reading had for your own understanding of reality? My understanding of reality has always been very provisional. It changes quite a bit from hour to hour and day to day, month to month.
If not sooner.
Yeah. So I've always had this allergic response to the word ontology. It drives me up a wall to hear people talking so confidently about something that they're pretty clueless about, but that doesn't stop them, you know. And I think what I have enjoyed about reading this, I have a confession to make. I haven't read this book. I've read some of the online installments that have you've posted, but I have read this one. I read this one, Dream About Reality. I read Why Materialism is Baloney, and I read this one, More Than Allegory. So I'm very familiar with him. And I guess the consequences for this reading have not happened yet for me. I think this reading is actually, the end of this reading is a beginning for some other kind of investigation that I believe I'm very engaged in. And I believe many of us already are and have been and will be for a very long time. I don't think we're gonna, it's not like there's a pop quiz and you're going to pass or fail it. It's not like that at all. I just want to share this from More Than Allegory. I hope you can see this drawing. It's a cylinder in the middle, and it's a 3D, the cylinder's 3D, but the shadows that the cylinder casts, depending on the angle, are a square or a circle. So the square and the circle are on different screens. I think this is a very helpful image because the shadows, a square and a circle, or an ellipse, I guess, are very different. But they're both shadows of the same object, which I guess Castro would say the cylinder is transcendent. But that helps me a lot. A visual analog like that helps me a lot to figure out what's going on in what I've been reading and putting together from my own actual experience, as sometimes often fragmented it is. And I think that reading from Materialism is Baloney, he has a wonderful chapter, which I've reviewed this morning, on the oscillating membrane metaphor. So I'm going to draw upon those. I'm going to refer to that quite a bit. Hopefully today I'll get around to some of this in this session today. But my desired outcome here is that I want to advocate for the transformation of sense perception so that we can stop forgetting what we are. Last night, I'm quoting from a dream I had. This was on, I believe, April 27th, and I posted this dream in another thread on Beyond the Drama Triangle. But some of you I know were participating in that. I think Daniel was on that. And I posted this, and this is a public announcement I'm making of an internal interior state. It's not internal, it's interior. There's a difference between the internal and the interior and the external and the exterior. I think that I think this is something Bernardo Kastrup is trying to make clear, that most physicists are materialists, and they're looking at the outside. They're not looking at what's happening on the interiors of a person. So that would be subjective, and it's sort of taboo because it lacks objective status. And I think this is what Kastrup is very expertly trying to deconstruct. But I just wanted to share this dream. On April 27th, last night, I dreamed that I was flying above a crowd of people. Many persons saw me flying above them, and they went on about their business, ignoring me. I went high above them, and I knew that I could go higher because I have done that before. Instead, I paused and looked at my dream hand. And my dream hand is very different from my physical hand. My dreaming hand was morphing, and I had very long fingers, very extraterrestrial looking. And I was looking at this dream hand, and I asked myself, I said, how could I serve myself and others by sharing a lucid flying dream? And I woke up. So that question which I posed in that lucid dream, I'm reporting that in this shared space, this shared reality in the making through this technology. You're all like little heads on this flat screen, but we're all sharing the English language, and we're making sense as best we can of many different kinds of states of mind. And I think this ties in directly with what Kastrup is working with. So I'm just gonna open that up, open up the space here. And I also wanna add a meta comment that I made to that dream sequence and to the decision to post it. Because I don't think this is all about me. I don't think this dream is about me, although I'm definitely involved because it's coming through me, and I'm having to write it down and think about it and contemplate it and try to make sense of it and post it in a public forum like this. I make this comment. It can be quite shocking to realize that I am not a thing. I am a relational process in motion between dimensions. And then what happens? Death dies too, just as the capitalist system and the death cult it created is dying. And what is born out of that, of the ashes of this death cult. And the final question I have is, what are the meta-politics of meta-dreamers? Okay, so I just open that up. I hope that was of interest to somebody, and I'm very curious about how all of you are making sense of this very difficult text in the very difficult and turbulent times we're reading this text. Thank you.
So, what I feel this text impressed upon me as reading it and interacting with everybody's thoughts on it and their experience of it is that human beings with their bodies and their brains and their environment have to make sense of what's going on. They just have to. It's a fundamental fact that if we're going to live, we have to make sense of how to move and act in the world and or in life. And in doing that, we create or we formulate or we, I don't know what you want to call it, we interact, participate through our senses, through our ability to organize our senses in some kind of coherent way. And we come up with these ideas. I'm gonna just say, because I'm playing off the metaphor, the idea of the world. And then we try to talk to each other about it. And what I appreciate about Castro's this book, even though I didn't agree with some of the styles of the way he was presenting his argument, because of some wording that I just have allergies for, when people talk about superiority and only, this is only. I did appreciate, by going through the whole thing, of just understanding his passion to help people, especially academics, get a shot of my experience of what he for me, that was affecting me. That there's a kind of thinking that is whole body. I don't agree with him that we need to, that materialism should be, or maybe I didn't understand that, but I just think that sometimes he was he was framing it in such a way that, that this idealism that everything is just a mental construct and therefore there's no material matter, I can't totally buy that. It doesn't work for me. But I do get his approach that the main thought process that we've been given has kind of reached its limit, and we need to look at that. We need to really seriously look how that's affecting us. I like what Johnny said when he started off, of a transformation of the senses, I think you said, John, because I think this is one of the things that I think both idealism and materialism have a very, for me, a very contracted, marginalizing, disaffecting relationship to senses, that I think, from my Zen training and meditation, the senses are like portals, so they're contact points. And why shouldn't we get better at interacting, engaging in those contact points, and moving with them, but not in such a way that we're totally dependent on our senses or dependent on our mental constructs or ideas of the world. We need to kind of find that third option, from my point of view, that there's a third option, and I can't clarify it. I can't totally put it into words, but I know it exists in my experience. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but to me, it sounded good. Thank you.
Yeah, kind of a brief comment, perhaps. Well, first of all, I just a few days ago I saw, probably I don't know if we talked about the series called "Closer to the Truth" about the Kuhn, about it's a half hour. He goes about reality, philosophical questions, and just the other day there was a series, like he puts the title, it's on YouTube, it's the all episodes are on YouTube to be watched. It's half hour. It's about philosophical questions, the science of philosophy, consciousness obviously there, and the question that he was so he interviews scientists and philosophers, and the questions a few days ago, I believe, or 1 week, was like, is consciousness fundamental? So precisely what's the idea of idealism and Bernardo is advocating for. So he went and he interviewed persons, and as I've all felt earlier, that there certainly is a call or a niche, a place for Bernardo. There was probably 3 or 4 persons that were more or less on his lines, including Don Hoffman. I don't know if who have talked about him, but he's like he's on the same lines with Kastrup, even though he calls his approach as conscious realism, consciousness realism, or something like that. But he's a psychologist and has been also exposed or interviewed. And so, yeah, I felt maybe, obviously, I might be biased. By now, I'm probably biased because I've been so much into Bernardo, but like I really felt that his take or his position or all what we read really fits perfect, like in the panoply, in the diversity of all those who are trying to come up with this something more than physicalism to add or complement, or however one might say, to this narrative of physicalism, then Bernardo it certainly is. So I'm very glad, well, that when I went through this book with you, and yes. But so the basic that I'm trying to wrap my mind on is like the premises of that the outer world is just an experience, or the outer world, material world, is an inner experience. I don't know how the wording goes, but something like that. So that's as it was here on the last chapter. Also, it's like I really I can't still grasp it. Like that's like I can. What does it really mean? But I'm hopeful that I will get. So that's my object. I mean, I'm always trying to imagine what does it really, because he seems to be interiorized. Obviously, for him, it's obvious, and he seems to have reached some kind of like how does he came up with that, for what I believe was some kind of an insight, like he developed. I can't speak, like for me at least, it was based on an experiential insight that then some that he just compiled abstract notions and concepts, how they came up with this thing. So yeah, looking forward. I mean, yeah. So okay, that's something for now.
Yeah. Um, do you hear me, or is my microphone is
Yeah.
okay? Okay. Um, yeah. What is my takeaway of this book? I would say that. Hi, Kyle. Hi, Kyle. Mm,
Hello,
from
sorry I'm late.
hello, welcome. No, my takeaway is not that now know more. I have no more knowledge. Of course, also this. In the book, I underlined a lot of things, and what I also like is the bibliography at the end, where you can. There are a lot of interesting articles. I suggest even most are technical, so not an easy read, but there are a lot of interesting papers that I didn't know about, and so. But my takeaway is more not about the content, but about the significance of this. My video has enlarged. Is this normal? Okay, you still copy me. But for me, it is not the book as such, but the person, the author, the individual that is important for me, because Bernardo Kastrup actually represents, I think, a binding, a point of connection between a type of culture and another, hopefully, at least hopefully for me, coming culture. What kind of culture it is, we can only speculate, but we are going beyond this purely physicalist, materialist paradigm. We are still deeply entrenched in it, but Kastrup is one of the people, one of the personalities that we really need, I think, that we really need to create a connection between one paradigm and another. One might also object that, okay, but what Kastrup says has been already said since the time of Plato and so on. Yes, in a certain sense it's true, but what Kastrup nowadays can do and Plato couldn't is that he's using science, he's using neuroscience, he's using biology, he's using psychology, physics, and so on to bring forward an argument that is not easy perhaps to grasp, to understand if you read, I don't know, Kant or Schopenhauer or all the other idealists, but you can create a connection with it. And that's also what I'm trying to do now. By the way, this figure with the cylinder and square and the disc that Johnny showed up recently, previously. I use it also in my book on quantum physics, where I use it to explain the principle of quantum superposition, where you have a superposition of two states, but which are neither one state nor the other, but in reality they are even not both states. It is yet another state that we can not imagine in our mind, because there is nothing out there in this mental world in which we are immersed, which is after all a symbol of our perceptions, is a symbolic reproduction of the perceptions, that the things that we perceive. But with this analogy, you can show that a quantum system, for example, can be in a superposition in a third state, which is neither nor, but is the cylinder. But you will never see the cylinder as it is. You will see only the disk, or the square, or whatever, the rectangle. And I use this also to show some concepts of idealism, and you can today relate this to the die-hard physicalist science. You can make a relation, an example with experiments that can be done today with sophisticated technologies, with laser technology, optical, photonic devices and whatever, and that once upon a time the philosophers could not do. And Bernardo is doing this, I think. He's creating this sort of, now we are going from the physicalism to a sort of idealism. I think this is only a preparation to something that goes even beyond that, and in my view it will be some form of spiritual view of reality, of the universe, of ourselves, of humankind, of life on earth, of the existence. And my view, I don't know, maybe in 500 years, I don't know, we will have something like neither materialism nor idealism, and even not this spirituality that people are talking about, and that sometimes it's a bit but we will maybe the human race is going towards a sort of divine materialism, and that's what at least some are calling it, a divine materialism, where you have the putting together of one thing and the other, but it is neither one thing nor the other, and it isn't even not the sum of the two. It is something else again, a third state, like the cylinder, that actually we can't see, but one day we will see it as it is in itself. And I think people like Kastrup are preparing the ground to create in the collective consciousness. He's opening some doors so that we can get acquainted with these ideas. Because otherwise, if you throw it to people in the face of the people, just like it is, this will shock them, and this overcharge them. So I welcome Kastrup a lot, and well, I will have to say some other things about him later, but let's you speak now.
Just to catch Kyle up on what we're going through right now, this is basically an answer to the question. So what's our takeaway, individual for each of us? What's our takeaway from what we're doing? What's this reading that we've gone through for the last 13 weeks contributed to our own understanding of where we're going? John picked up on the question that I had posted in the forum there. So what's the consequences for your own thinking of what it is that we've gone through? So if you're wondering why we're in a very high level mode of expression, that's why. So we'd certainly like to hear your thoughts on this too.
That's kind of what I was expecting. That makes a lot of sense. But I'm not ready to get my 2 cents worth yet.
Kyle, take your time. we're all working on this together.
Yeah, I just don't want to start blurting things out, you know?
Yeah, well, when the timing is right, feel free to join in. I just wanted to share this drawing. This spontaneously emerged out of this discussion so far. There's a circle. It's divided by a line. One circle is A, another circle is B, okay? Can you see that? Okay. Now, the line that separates A from B is not inside A or B, okay? But that line makes space A and space B possible, okay? So, Bernardo talks about quite a bit in this previous book, The Mind is a Membrane, okay? And so if we look at this as the line, I say it could be a membrane, it could be a mirror, it could be a window, but it separates, but it does not divide necessarily A from B. And we experience this all the time. We walk from a dark room into the outside, and we make that passage. And there's some interior state of being in a dark room and then being outside in the light. That's memory, a memory that accompanies those two different kinds of experiences that are both real. So I'm saying, I have a dream, and in the dream, I see a dream hand, which is looks very different from a dream that I have in this world over here, where I have a hand also, but it's a physical hand. I also see trees in the dream. I see a house over here. I see a house, I see a tree. In the waking state, the physical hand, there's a physical house, a physical tree. There's also a ground that I stand upon, and there's gravity that holds me to that ground. But in the dream space, there is no gravity. It's an option whether I obey it or not. I can fly in the dream space. It's a kind of anti-gravity, if you will. I'm suggesting that, and I think Castro would agree with me, that the physicalists and the realists are dividing A from B and saying B does not exist, only A exists. And that's what we're going to focus on the relationship between our experience of the world out there. And that's all that exists. So there's inevitably going to be only partial truths that are going to be generated by that orientation. If you're someone like me, who has a memory of moving between that membrane or that mirror or that window, whatever your metaphor du jour is. And Castro uses lots of metaphors. I suggest that's the only way we can talk about this stuff at all. So I'm just sharing that with you because I think it has vast lived experience. It makes a big fucking difference to how you operate in the world when you know this is true. And when people try to tell you you're lunatic, you're unhinged, or you're mentally, or you're manifesting some sort of pathology, you have to say, well, wait a minute. If you haven't had these kinds of experiences, that's fine for you to make that conclusion. But if you have had these experiences, you can interpret them in many different ways. But I think this is where we're really up against it. Because we've had, I don't know how many hundreds of years of this strategy, basically, which bifurcates our consciousness and says only on one side of it is there reality. On the other side of it, it's purely subjective and it's fantasy. And we can therefore ignore it. Because I do believe there are phenomena that occur constantly in the shared realities of this kind of warped epistemological, ontological configuration, which we call science, that doesn't make sense. And I think Kastrup is just saying it doesn't make sense because most scientists are materialists, they're physicalists. And so they're going to constantly be generating all kinds of paradoxes and conflicts and enigmas. And he says if we would just stop trying to divide everything, and one side of the membrane is real and the other side is unreal or imaginary or can be dismissed entirely, labeled and dismissed as subjective, then we would have a very different lived reality. I believe we would be co-creating together a different reality and a much more interesting one. But there's no guarantee of that. Anyway, I'm just sharing that because I want to make a plea for the imaginary, not the imaginary, but the imaginal. The imaginal is different from the imaginary. The imaginary is just fantasy, make-believe, whatever, reverie, whatever. And I think there's value in that. But there's also the imaginal, which has an objective component to it. So it's not just something that I make up or you make up. That's why I'm saying that that dream that I had where I was looking at my hand, I was flying and I was looking at my hand and I asked myself a question. I was posing a question in a certain space. And then I am now in another space. So I've passed through the membrane, but I can still register the vibration. And I think this is going back to Bernardo and a very long chapter here on why materialism is baloney. He's talking about the oscillating membrane of the metaphor, the oscillating membrane, which he calls a metaphor. But it's also the basis of M theory and string theory. And I think there's the vibratory nature of a reality, of a membrane, an ordinary membrane, which is in 2 dimensions, and a membrane which is has more than 2 dimensions. It would be a very different kind of vibratory experience. So I believe we have access to multiple dimensions, and you can find this out through your experience of daily life, as far as I'm concerned. But it's a daily life that isn't restricted or constrained by this very outside, is the only thing that's real, is outside orientation. Because I believe that reality is very permeable, and it's vibratory, and it's mixed. And there are many different kinds of informational configurations that can come to us, but we have to translate that into something that makes sense to the fellows that we're in community with. So I want to bring back Hoffman here. I think Daniel, you mentioned something about Hoffman. I think you said he was on a panel with Bernardo Kastrup. I'd love to see this. Maybe you could post a link to that. But Hoffman, I think, has something similar to what Kastrup says. He says, I'm quoting Kastrup here, the world we perceive around us, around ourselves, is a coded phenomenal representation, which I call the extrinsic appearance of equally phenomenal processes unfolding across the dissociated boundary of our alter. So I guess that membrane, that boundary, and the A and the B, I think he's talking about dissociation. So when you're in A, you've forgotten about B. When you're in B, you've forgotten about A. But there are some persons, and I am one of those persons, who can remember A and B. I can remember being in both, but I can differentiate the differences. And I think that he's one of these people as well. And I don't think we're that unusual. I think there are lots of us, but we just don't report our experiences very typically because we're considered crazy if you have these experiences. But I think that's less and less the truth. So I think that we're getting, with near-death experiences and telepathic reports and all kinds of, what would you call it? These kinds of asynchronous events, perhaps. But I think we're getting a lot of reports from many different fields of study, which become paradoxical because of this rigid enforcement of a physicalist paradigm. So I'm just making a plea, like, once again, what did I say? I want to advocate for a transformation of sense perception, because all of our organs, in a sense, have membranes. And membranes are where the organs meet and vibrate. And of course, that's happening in each organism, in each sensorium. And there's the human, and then there's the other than human. Birds and bees and flowers and trees are doing this too. They're all vibrating in certain kind of membranes. So I'm just making a plea that we, find ways of talking about this stuff in ways that can make sense. But I don't think it's going to make sense to everybody. I think these hardcore materialists are going to die that way. And God bless them, I just don't think that those of us who have a wider range of affect and imagination should be, dismissed just because we have these experiences and want to share them. I think we need to create forums that are balanced and can accommodate the cognitive dissonance that comes with the reportage of these experiences. I think it takes a great deal of maturity and responsibility. And I'm not sure that I'm necessarily that person. I don't think I can do this. Certainly no man or woman is an island. We can't do this on our own. We need allies and we need support. Or it is too easy for us to just dismiss our own experience as irrelevant and get on with the business at hand, which is basically about making money and serving the corporations or whatever. So I probably said enough and should just press the pause button, and I'm really eager to hear how other people are resonating with this. Thanks.
Kyle, did you want to say something?
I was just responding by saying, free the imagination. And don't underestimate it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
A lot of sense.
Yeah.
So Johnny, you really have excited my imagination with everything you said. There's Bernardo brings up this idea of vibration and excitation, and how it was interesting when he brought that forward, because I'm going, yeah, it dropped me down to real. I'm from California and I'm all about vibrations. That's California surfer dude. But when he mentioned excitation, it was like, yeah, it's that for vibration to manifest, there's an excitation. And I also take this in terms of our senses of, and Zen is very good from my experience of pay attention to the contact, the tactility of the senses of your body, the membrane of your body in the outside world. Now, one of the things that I think that I just want to bring forward, because I love your picture, Johnny, and stuff, but the one element I think that needs to be discussed, that there's another membrane that is created that we have a hard time with because of the materialist, and how we make the sense of I, of being independent, grounded in a materialist, narrow reduction, solid dense. We have to, that we actually, the membrane of the I is created in such a way because of this materials. And I'm just riffing off of what I feel is happening off of your metaphor of membrane, because I grew up with a father that taught me that said to be independent. But the one thing I pushed back against him in his expression of that notion, it was good to be independent, but don't disagree with me. Don't listen to my side. And when I hear people pushing this notion of and advocating from an independent source, it feels too stonish. It's like it's cut off. And I'm not against having a sense of independence, but it's like they ignore that we're not absolutely independent from the world around us. We're not independent from our own. We tend to, from my experience, we tend to isolate, like maybe like what Castro was trying to lay. We tend to disassociate certain experiences within ourselves because they're too dissident and hurts too much. And until we really bring forth of looking at that membrane of the I, useful as it is useful, but what are we, and maybe I'm being inspired by this notion of quarantine, of isolation. And there's a certain, based on Zen, going into solitude and sitting with your experience, there is a plus side to it. But most people, because of the materialist viewpoint and its absoluteness, we're not given permission to, or I don't know, permission is the right word, but there's not a balance that, yeah, being isolated can be dangerous, but it also is a form of how to relate to the organs and the senses in our body and the objects and the life around us. Yeah, I'm speaking from that notion. I'm excited by what I'm hearing, how we're sharing.
I would love to respond to that, Michael, but if anyone else wants to chime in, I'll press the pause button and I can. Does someone else want to offer something?
Yeah, I may add something about your ideas about the dimensions. So I add this so you can comment eventually also on this one, because that's something that I feel so deeply. Also, I put it more on the technical side. Sorry if I fall in these technicalities, because actually I'm fully immersed in this kind of research actually, and I see when I read these papers of some scientists who were in one way or another, you have to deal with the idea of consciousness. They see only one dimension, that of waking consciousness. There's nothing else. If you are awake, and in a relatively good health, mental health, then you are conscious. Everything else is semi, half conscious, subconscious, unconscious, but it's more or less of much less value. Yeah? So consciousness is waking consciousness per definition. Nothing else exists. This one-dimensionality of modern neuroscience, I would say, because yes, you can make also parallels in physics and other sciences, but it's when it comes to consciousness, I would say it's modern neuroscience or cognitive neurosciences. And I made a list of all the type of consciousness, states of consciousness that I can think of. There are many others certainly, but apart from the waking consciousness, it is known that there are at least 7 states in the sleeping state. You can measure this with die-hard materialist technology, with the EEG and the brain scans and all that stuff. You can see that there are at least 7 states of consciousness in the sleeping consciousness. But these are wiped away from Occam's razor. We don't need that. No? It's multiplication of pluralities, as Occam said. No? So you cut away all these states of consciousness. Then there is also people, I already said that last time, but I am fascinated by these people sleepwalking. What kind of state of consciousness is it? I don't know. I have no idea, because as far as I know, nobody told me that I sleepwalk, but I'm just, or in the state of hypnosis, deep meditation. The thing with the dissociated alters, which is one of the main topics of Castro. When you're in a state of coma, you are totally unconscious. How do you know that? There is research, there is clear research that shows that people, not all, but many in the so-called vegetative state, permanent vegetative state, you can show nowadays with modern technologies that they are conscious somehow in some way, because you can see this, you can even ask them questions. So what kind of unconsciousness is that? Then, well, Johnny said lucid dreaming. And in the case of amnesia, suddenly some part of your life doesn't exist anymore. You were unconscious or what? So the issue of memory. Anesthesia, when you are anesthetized for a surgical operation. And dementia. When you have a dementia, what kind of consciousness is that? And but there's only on-off. We have a digital science nowadays. This is one of the main aspects of physicalism that is hard to extract and expel from the mind, also from high-ranking scientists, the professors who teach in universities. And that's something that I think we will only able to go beyond that if we will try to take also, or try at least, to take a first person experience, to try this, not only just think with the mind and with complicated theories, intellectual theories, but go inward and see, okay, but how do I feel these things? How do I feel when I sleep? I mean, you don't need to be a big yogi with certain, go into some mystic trance. Yeah? Just think, where are you and what are you doing when you are sleeping, having a dream? You don't exist. Or okay, you are less conscious. How? In what sense? Try to get into that, and from that, also speculate, if you wish, but expand your mind. And that's, I think, this is a problem of dimensionality we have in modern science, which is only one-dimensional, whereas it should be multidimensional, because that's reality. It's not because we are multiplying unnecessary hypotheses, because this is what the most scientists do. This is also a little critics to Castor, who insists on this parsimony, because we want to be parsimonious, then we cut away everything, and then nothing exists anymore. And if it does not, if you believe that it does not exist, you don't look for it, you don't search for it, and you obviously won't also no longer find it. And this will confirm your prejudice that it doesn't exist. And this is a vicious circle that we have to break, I think.
That's
Okay.
beautifully said, Marco. I love the way you articulated that. Thank you.
I was going to just mention that a couple of other things that brought to mind. For one thing, infants and newborns, you know, how much farther along are we than we were a long time ago, as far as, you know, they didn't, at least we know that they feel pain, right? And that sort of thing, but we don't give them much credit for being actual functioning consciousness. And then the other, what was the other thing? Anyway, I don't know why there's, you know, if people didn't have such giant egos, then, you know, especially like, you know, lots of academic competition and all that. If there wasn't so much of that, then everybody wouldn't need so much ego, maybe. And then they would be willing to acknowledge, well, yes, I'm a physicist, and this is what we do, and this is what we think, and, you know, we don't know anything about life or consciousness of any of that, and science was never intended to address consciousness. I mean, since way back when, right? Since Galileo must have said something about that. You know, we're not going to try to talk about what goes on inside your head that much. You know, it's just real practical, utilitarian stuff. So, I mean, we should be able to say, yeah, that's fine. We need this kind of utilitarian mentality to get things done. But obviously, these are not, you know, the sources of all wisdom, or you know. So anyway, I was at some point I wanted to talk about Kastrup's statements about space and time. Is that something that we've gotten to?
Yeah, I think we can do that.
Yeah, because there's a section in here that's called the it's in the closing commentary, and it's about the conundrum of space-time, I think is what he calls it. But so he says that you know, space and time are qualities of experience, right? I wish I could tell you, I couldn't tell you what page that's on because I've got it on my Kindle. But anyway, yeah, the unavoidable conundrum of space-time. So what's interesting to me is I've been thinking and posting once in a while stuff like, well, why doesn't Bernardo ever study like Whitehead or, you know, process philosophy and stuff like that? But what Whitehead says the same. I mean, they agree on this. Time is a quality of experience. Only, and I don't know what Whitehead would think of alters, but in Whitehead's philosophy, he calls it the philosophy of organism. he describes the real things, the actual things are not really things, they're processes, they're changed over time, right? And so that really not only is there dissociation on that we, you know, can individually be altered, individually be dissociated, but really, when you come right down to it, we are simply a series of dissociate beings that have a history and that go forward in time, and we can look back and see our previous and see our history, and that is always going to be there, and the future is never going to be there because it's not there yet. Anyway, I still think Bernardo should read more Whitehead, but he does agree. I mean, so experience is really the bottom line, right? And if time is experience, then you can look back in time and experience your past. But you can't look forward and experience much, except that everything is implied. I mean, the present has the seeds of the future, right? So that all these things that are simply implied by the present, they're going to unfold in the future. So anyway, that's enough of that for the moment, but that's just what was triggered by my this reading here.
Thank you, Kyle. I'd like to respond to that and to several comments that have been made. A series of dissociated beings, I believe you said, Kyle, and this, which can look into the past as a dissociated being. You can look into your personal past, but
Right.
You can't look into your future. And I just want to add, which past, which future, and what kind of time? And I think that it was mentioned about the personal pronoun I, Michael. Michael and I have done a personal study of this on a previous thread. And I think Marco mentioned vibration as well. We were talking about vibratory patterns and membranes that and multiple dimensions. And what kind of vibrations would be registered by a sensorium which had access to multiple dimensions besides the basic three. And what is that relationship between those basic three dimensions and those other kinds of vibratory capacities? Now, some people can register the basic three and beyond the basic three. But I think there's that kind of relationship is being tracked, I think, by Bernardo Castro in this series of texts that he's explored. But the personal pronoun I am making an assertion here that the I is not the ego. The personal pronoun I is much more than a linguistic device that we all share in order to designate a speaker. Because, and I'm taking this little chart here, which I'm elaborating on as I listen to this conversation. We have the line that's dividing A and B. So this is a dream space. This is a waking space. This is physical. There's a ground that you stand on. There's houses and there are trees, and there are others, multiple others, and relationships and networks. This is, I think, very familiar to most of us. And I think also familiar to most of us is these dreamscapes we enter into. Some of us can become lucid, and we are aware that there are differences. We can do a comparative analysis between this physical shared waking space with others and a shared dream space that's shared with others. There are others here. We're not alone. And the status of those others, that second order, or what you would say a second person. There's a first person, a second person, and a third person in both these spaces. And the second order is very different here than it is here, but there are some similarities. You're not constrained by gravity here. There are many different kinds of rapport and affective zones you can explore collectively here that you cannot over here, unless there is a personal pronoun I that is not necessarily attached to an ego, that can move between the membrane. And remember, I can say this because I remember it. And I'm conveying it now in this event with persons who share a language. So it's going to be very slippery indeed, because even if we share a common language, there's going to be all kinds of differences and different associations that are being made as language users. So I'm just offering this because when you gotta have a personal pronoun I that can move from here to here and remember what was over here, so that you can then ground yourself on planet Earth and bring back a gift. If there's no personal pronoun I that can register this, you may be having incredibly intense vibratory experiences on many different levels and many different dimensions, and remember none of it when you come back here. And I think this is the challenge for us, for our common humanity, is are we going to be able to create new metaphorical constructs and not just rely upon the old-fashioned archetypes, which most of us have used, and some of us have discarded because the archetypes don't work anymore. They're just very old, and they have been very useful, but they shouldn't dominate our imaginations now, as I believe they do. So I'm just opening up this possibility space, a new kind of possibility space, which would be a third space, perhaps. Just like there's a first person and a second person in A and B, there's also a third person, an objective space in A and in B. And that's what I'm very curious about. I think we're getting very close to something that I think Gebser would call the originary. And so that's where I'm coming from right now. And believe me, this is not easy to talk about, but I want a quotation that Bernardo offers in that appendix from Anita Mojani. She had a near-death experience, and he's quoting her. I certainly don't feel reduced or smaller in any way. On the contrary, I haven't ever felt this huge, this powerful, this all-encompassing. I felt greater and more intense and expansive than my physical being. I felt greater and more intense and expansive than my physical being. There had to be some capacity for memory in these two different kinds of states. So I think this ties in with a series of dissociated beings that can look into a past. And in which time can you look into a past or future? There's a different kinds of time when you're moving from A into B and the in-between. So I think there are some persons who can have precognitive experiences. There are some people who can have telepathic experiences with more than one species. And I think these are difficult to track simply because we don't have the linguistic tools yet to pull that off. But I do think, and I'm quoting, I think here again, it's how egos form and gain access to a shared collective, apparently external reality. This is his question. I'm asking, how do egos form and gain access to a shared collective, interior reality. And the whole project of idealism, which he says explains three basic facts of reality. A, that brain activity correlates with experience. B, that we all seem to share the same world. C, that we can't change the laws of nature at will. And my big question is, and this is where I think I depart from Bernardo Kastrup there. I don't know if you would agree with me or not, but where do the laws of nature come from? That's my question. And could the laws of nature be more like habits? That's an open question for me, because I believe we are as participator observers in multiple dimensions. If there's an adequate center, which I'm using the term personal pronoun I, a first person, in all of those different dimensions, which is basically relational rather than a thing. We are not nouns, we're not verbs, we're in between nouns and verbs. I think that's where we enter into those liminal zones, which are pre-verbal and transverbal, and not verbal at all. They are vibratory. But can we come back to a consensus reality on planet Earth? Can we come back to planet Earth and create a new consensus reality where persons who can register multiple vibrations in this human sensorium can coordinate activities in the arts and the sciences? I think they can. And I think Bernardo thinks they can too. And he thinks that they would be producing a different kind of technology than the technology that is being produced by persons who split the world in the way that the physicalists do. So that's a big research topic I have. So thank you for giving me this chance to rehearse out loud in a public forum. A lot of these very privately held experiences that, I'm sort of risk averse, and there's certain there's certain places where you just don't share this stuff. But where are we going to create the conditions for this exploration? Because I think we have to use this technology in a way that it has not necessarily been designed for in the military industrial info complex. And I hope this is a little subversive. I think what we're doing today, trying to create conditions for an alternate or an alternative reality than the ones that we've probably all been brought up in and have been sanctioned by certain sort of externalizing forces. So anyway, that's my big spiel. So I hope that makes sense to somebody. I'm working on this. Thank you.
I like that. I just briefly wanted to ask if so you're talking about different pasts and different potential futures and different, but aren't there are also different paths that you can sort of align yourself with? You can sort of rewrite your story, right? And then the facts sort of assemble themselves in a different way so that they mean something different. So I'm wondering if you've ever experienced something like that whether in a dream or otherwise, that you're sort of rewriting something that's in the past, that's not fixed, right?
You're muted, John. You're muted, John.
We can't hear you. Wait a minute. You
There's
can
something going
chat.
on.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get back to the original screen. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to quote myself. I think you were addressing this to everybody, Kyle, but maybe me in particular, but I'm just going to share this without hopefully getting too hopelessly self-referential. But I shared this in our forum. It was delivered on February 18th, a Dream Yoga report. And I think it is relevant to the question you just posed, Kyle, to the group. So I'm resonating with your question. And it's a kind of a meta question. I think I think it's more important actually that we create questions that resonate with these multiple dimensions than just try to create answers that stabilize this pseudo orientation, I think, of materialism, that materialism insists on. So I'm just offering this. The dreamer, I myself, is fully aware of morphing shapes in a blob of glowing liquid a few feet away from me. There is a sense of distance between the self and the substance that has a malleable quality like wax and a sculptural quality like marble. As I watch, I also feel a mood that the blob picks up on. The blob has an intelligence and is moving at a speed that is hard for me to figure out. It is as if the blob is trying to create some imagery that is out of sync with my sense of time. I'm still bringing into this imaginary space an orientation which I have learned from my Earth experience of past, present, future in a certain kind of grid. So, but this blob is way beyond that. And I think I am aware that it is aware of my awareness and can, if I'm anxious, will create trickster leering faces. If I relax, it assumes a wide variety of humanish shapes. I watch with a neutrality, and then something happens. I am inside a space with other humans, and we are in very close proximity in a mental space attached to bodies and sensing a field of interactive agencies. I notice I am standing next to a large man with a golden glow, blonde, a short cropped beard, a heroic figure. I ask his name telepathically. He says, "I am Ray." I put my hand on his heart chakra and in tune, he has like a body, not a physical body, but there's a body there, it's humanoid. And I tune into him vibrationally. I sense that we are neutral. I've matched his vibration and that we are matched in power. And I ask, shall we go to heaven? And he agrees to travel with me. And then we are moved through I don't know what this is, a wormhole? I have a question mark, into another area with many humanoid persons. We enter an enclosed area with mirrors everywhere. It's like a cafe. I notice my hands on the countertop of this cafe, on this table where we're sitting, and I tap out a rhythmic pattern. It's like and my partner, Ray, plays with the pattern too. And then we enter into a lively exchange of these rhythmic patterns that we're making on this tabletop. And then I feel and hear the patterns that we improvise. And then a young Black man joins us and we create a trio. So we're all making these different patterns, these rhythmic patterns together. Then I notice that none of the mirrors in this space are reflecting our image. I stop the motion and move to a mirror and notice that I have no reflection. I turn to my companions and I say, we have no reflection. There seems to be no reaction from them, as if this was unusual. It's very unusual to me, because when I usually look into a mirror in my physical experience, I see a face looking back at me, but I don't in this space where I am with these others. They are smiling. I am puzzled. I feel like they know something that I don't know. And I wonder, where is my self-image? I have a sense of a body and a mind with other minds and bodies and agencies, but without a reflected image. I wake up and I reflect upon this odd condition. And I go on and on. More things happened. but I'm just sharing this with you guys. I've already shared this with you before. It was in our second cafe, and I just offered that up as something that we could maybe contemplate together. This first-person account, but it's a first-person account from multiple. I don't even know how you talk about this stuff. I can't do adequate, I'm not a very good translator. And I think this is what my task, personal for myself, I don't think this is shared widely with other people, but I think there needs to be enough of us who can adequately translate between these multiple dimensions. And I do believe it's vibratory. But I think there's a lot of food for thought here. This guy, this person I met, and he calls himself Ray. I think that is so hyper odd. And I asked, shall we go to heaven? And going to this place with no mirrors, with mirrors, but there's no self-reflection. And so I think this is a very strange loop. And I'm just saying that personal pronoun I, which is so perplexing to most of us, is a strange loop. And it can get dissolved in meditative practices. But I don't think that's the end of the story. I think it's very dangerous when people think they can just dissolve the I and float off, float off into this other realm, which they prefer to the physical realm, planet Earth with gravity. I think we need to find a balance so that we can function optimally in many different kinds of dimensions, and bring that back to planet Earth. So I'm definitely an Earthling. I'm an advocate for being an Earthling, rather than either divorcing reality into the physical out there world or getting lost in an interior world. That may be very entertaining and interesting, but that can, I think, obscure and distort just as much as those who are trapped in a very physicalist orientation. So I hope that made sense to somebody. I'm trying to make sense of it myself, so thanks.
There were so many things that has been said now that I don't remember on what I could comment every time. I say, oh, that's interesting. I want to comment on that, and now I have nothing. In a certain sense, I have only pieces here and there. But in any case, yes, I agree with you, Johnny, about this thing. But can it not be also that apart A and B, there is a C that comprehends them both, and that we are speaking about A, there's only A, or there's only B, and now we are also thinking about somehow uniting them, but this might be also a wrong way where we are looking at. Maybe there is a C, D, E, F, G, and we have to discover all these dimensions, and then we can integrate the inner world and the outer world. And I think this will not happen unless we will rise to higher states of consciousness, and I will not go into Sri Aurobindo now and all this stuff, but so then also what Kyle said, what struck me, and because it's always it makes resonate something personal, so it struck some nerves, and you get nervous, but not because of what you said, but you noticed a certain attitude of scientists who say that they never intended to address consciousness. They say, no, this is not science, this is philosophy. No? Or when you speak about the philosophical issues of quantum mechanics, for example, or about the philosophical issues about reality and so on, they always say physicists especially, oh well, okay, but this is not science, this is not physics, it's not our job. Yeah? But when they are invited in some seminar or on a radio show or on a podcast or wherever on the TV, and they are asked about these things, then they say, ah, yes, because science shows that it is so and so and so. No? They express their opinion, and they say what they believe. They try to convey their own belief system, and they want to sell it as a scientific ultimate established truth, scientific truth, when it is not. So sometimes people say something that is true, correct, and nevertheless they make you think something that is completely wrong, in the sense that when they say that science never intended to address consciousness, really? Try to read some of these papers of neuroscientists who say, oh, we have discovered the seat of consciousness is in, I don't know, in which part of the brain, in the prefrontal cortex or here and there, or they have a lot of theories now how consciousness is supposed to happen and how it emerges and so on. So let's be honest, science is looking for consciousness but has no clue. So when people ask me about these things, I say, okay, I give you my opinion. I tell you what my idea is, but don't take it as a scientific truth. I don't. But whereas a lot of people do that, and that's something makes me nervous. That's about my nervousness about this thing. And then you said there's this utilitarian mentality. Absolutely. And this is also a big problem. Besides physicalism, I worked also in a university department where they were quite well funded with millions of euros. And from the financial point of view, they didn't have no problem. But now some time has passed. About 10 years ago, it was this, and when I look what I have discovered, what are the results, practical results, because they are always financed on the idea of how much practical results they will obtain. For example, for building new computers now, there's this big fashion of quantum computers. Let's see how this goes, in what direction this will go. I'm skeptic there, but I'm willing to change my idea if there is some news in this sense. But they are putting a lot of money on things that have practical aim, but don't produce the results that they were hoping for. So I would also say, let's see if this utilitarian mindset is perhaps just that mindset that disallows us to have a practical result, paradoxically. And maybe if we open our minds more to things that have meaning, that look for the meaning in things. There's a nice chapter here also from Kastrup, who speaks about a new science that searches for meaning in things, or philosophy. Or generally, we have lost the necessity to look for a meaning of things, of the universe, of life, of ourselves, of everything. We are only looking at the practical results. And you have this also in schools, in universities. And if you suggest a research program that has not really that, okay, there are some exceptions like particle physics with the CERN and maybe astronomy and so on, but usually if you don't have a gigantic group of hundreds of people who work together in the big science, if you have a little project which has not necessarily a practical application, but might have it nevertheless in hindsight, you will not be financed. You will not even get $50,000, but you will get millions of dollars if you propose something that is supposed to have a practical outcome, but after 10, 15, 20 years, it does not. So this is also one thing that is, I don't know if this is necessarily has to do with physicalism, but is one of the aspects. Yeah, it may be more general mindset, not only proper to physicalism, but. And yes, the last parenthesis, the laws of nature as habits. Yes, I like that.
I didn't make that up. That comes from Charles Saunders Peirce, actually, a famous American philosopher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but you know that in more modern times there is also Rupert Sheldrake is proposing this.
Yeah.
And once I was skeptical of that, but now I have studied. Well, this is not directly related with the laws of nature, but this to the morphogenetic fields. I've studied recently the mind of the cells,
Yeah.
not the yoga things. I mean, from the scientific point of view, they have made discoveries that cells have cannot be their behavior cannot be reduced just as a biochemical reflex, but there is a elementary mind there that is at work. But the cell don't have a brain. Don't have. It doesn't have a brain because
Great.
a neuron is a cell. So I think I tend to believe that there is, at least intuitively, something right in Rupert Sheldrake when he says that these cells and our everything is embedded somehow in this mental universe, and which might have something to do with these morphogenetic fields. Okay, that's
Well, that brings to mind Gregory Bateson. That just brings to mind his approach to mind and nature, and that way. I'm going to put forth something that, from the get-go, it's an allergy and it's a bias. Anytime we use words that have to do with a sort of spatialization of consciousness, rather than is it open or closed, I get a little nervous, because when, in my experience, when people, not that you meant that, Marco, you're that word and your phrasing it caused an excitement, like it excited me in an anxious way, because usually in the people that, why I have an allergy, when they talk higher, they don't want to accept or include what's lower. There's this, and I think this is part of how I feel about this tension between the idealist and the materialist. And it's probably the way I organize my experience, from the bottom up, and then try to, and then complete the circuit top down this way. That's one thing I've noticed about how I organize my experience. I go from the bottom up and then the top down. And and that's why I think, to everybody's point, I think that one of the things is, this is why questioning and having an open question it knocks on the doors of our preconceived ideas. It's, knocking on the door. Are you going to open it or not? Well, we know from experience, probably on both sides of the issue of idealist and materialist, some people just don't want to open the door. They just, because I like the language you were bringing in that resonates with me, of this third, what I say third option, but you talk, that way. And I think also something is the way we use our natural proclivity of spatializing, of putting things 3 dimensions, we use it with ignorance. We don't, you know, that's what art and certain forms of art, painting, even music or even theater, they're really working with the 3-dimensionality to move into whatever dimension that can be created out of working with 3 dimensions. Right now, what comes to mind is Michelangelo taking a piece of stone and sculpting something and making it 3-dimension for us, taking what's inside of his head, what he sees, for us to view. Well, that's another dimension, giving us permission to see what he sees. And so in a sense, open question. And I also have a bias. I think art precedes precedes religion and science by far. Science became important as far as being precise of how we work with bringing a meaning making to our world. Religion was about just meaning making and trying to work with it from that. These different realms try to work with meaning. Science is working with meaning whether they want to admit it or not. And I think that's what I like about Castro, is he's kind of making that explicit. Science has cut ourselves off from the meaning. I understand part of the reason, because when it came about, there was so much meaning, there was no differentiation and checking the facts. Well, how accurate is that? You know, how, like Galileo, you know? So I'm just putting forth my bias of, I prefer working with the tension, the excitation, the anxiety of how well, and this is what this book brought forth, how well am I being open or closed to what somebody is trying to put across, which doesn't mean my brains fall out and I don't have a discerning, you know, mind about it. I hope that kind of is okay.
I just want to quote something, since the appendix was on death, but I'm in this other book of his, I'm quoting from Why Materialism is Baloney. He has a section on physical death and the implications of death. He says something interesting. He says, and the status of the dead. I'm quoting here, all communication is a process of resonance. A dead person might simply be a differentiated structure that no longer resonates with the patterns of vibration we call the empirical world, but it will still resonate with other patterns. The question then is whether a living person can, through non-ordinary states of consciousness, tune into the vibratory patterns put out by a deceased person. He goes on to say, there can hence only be a cognitive or telepathic connection between the living and the dead. The deceased person molds the perception in the mind of the living person. I think that's very suggestive. He goes on to talk previously about the ego as a loop, but he says there's other loops, and that the ego is that they're underlying partial, not so closely closed loops underneath the egoic loop. So that egoic loop is on the top, perhaps, of a vast interstellar combination of all kinds of times and places and spaces and memories. And I think that we in the 3-dimension, that, you know, and artists and poets and musicians, we play around with the 3-dimension, but I believe there are 4th and 5th dimensions that most artists are drawing upon, even though they're placing it in a 3-dimensional space that they can share a shared reality with others. But I don't think they're confined to that. I remember, and I'm quoting here, I played King Lear, he dies on stage. I've played several, I've died on stage a number of times, and I've also held in my arms those who are dying on stage. And I've done it in real life as well. And I think there is something that happens in those moments, right when you're at the edge and something opens up. It usually shuts down, but while it opens up, I think we have amazing opportunities to resonate. And anyway, King Lear, he has, I'm trying to remember this one. These are his final words. He's on the stage with his dead daughter, Cordelia. She was hung. Very violent death in his presence. And he's over her dead body. He's saying, my poor fool is hanged. No, no, no life. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all? Thou'lt come no more. Never, 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 never. I pray you, sir, undo this button. Thank you, sir. Look there, her lips. Look there, look there. And then he dies. So he had his friend, he asked his friend, I pray you, sir, undo this button. Thank you, sir. I think Lear's having a hard time breathing and he's getting ready to die. But I think he's sharing this, a kind of resonance between himself and his recently dead daughter. She's just passed on. And I think there's something vibratory about that. And I think audiences, when the actors are attuned with the text, I think the audience gets it. And I think it's something shared and it's vibratory and it's beyond the basic 3 dimensions. And I think we call that the unconscious. So my final expression here from this book, I think he's talking about the gap. I don't know if I can find the quote, but I think that this gap, a hard problem. Okay, he says he's talking about Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli. Jung, of course, psychologist, Pauli is a physicist. And he has this, I'm just quoting him briefly. Perhaps one day, physicists and psychologists will take a hint from the collaboration between Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli and realize that they are both tackling different aspects of the exact same problem. Physicists trying to model the movements of mind corresponding to the so-called outer world, while psychologists try to make sense of the movements of mind corresponding to the so-called inner world. I think poets and playwrights are doing this too. Both camps are working with different modes of vibration of the membrane of mind. The day this realization dawns upon our intellectual elite will be the day that the hard problem of consciousness disappears, where its artificiality will become self-evident. I pray for that day. I hope it comes soon. Thank you all.
Kastrup has recently written a book about Jung. If I don't remember. Okay, I will look for it.
I think,
So,
sorry, it's coming out. He hasn't.
yeah, it's coming out. Yeah.
The Schopenhauer is now like published, but Jung is still.
Jung is still in the
the
publishing,
yeah.
but he has written it, but it is only a matter of the editor to publish it.
Yeah.
And I think it sounds good. I have the feeling this will be something that will be quite disruptive, more than Schopenhauer. But let's see. Maybe the next book.
Yeah, who is familiar with Schopenhauer? You know, that was a real. He kind of pointed towards him in a number of books that he's written, so that obviously had to be done. But from the books that John has mentioned, more than allegory, and especially why materialism is baloney and whatnot. He deals very extensively with Jung, so it's certainly not surprising that he would be working on something in that regard as well. We're coming up on the top of the hour when we have our targets. We have to take into consideration those people who may want to sit and look at this video later, how long they're going to do that. And in the time of compressing attention spans, that's not always easy to do. And not everyone can take a number of sessions to get through a tape, but be that as it may. I found, again, as has been the case in all of the previous sessions, this has been a very interesting discussion. We've gone from soup to nuts and back again on a lot of things, but it's to me, it's all very thought-provoking. It's things to get us to think about how we think about things more than anything else. And this is where I see the advantage of Kastrup's approach. I think all of us who are here and all of us who show up regularly for these kind of sessions about this book don't belong to those diehard physicalists who want things to be a certain way. We're open to other things. And what I also think is that there are more of us than we give ourselves credit for. I don't think that this is a point that you made, Marco. Kastrup is actually providing a way and a means and a point of focus for all of those others who don't agree with how things are being perpetrated, because it raises more questions than it answers now. There's for a long time, and I have absolutely no beef with materialists. A lot of positive things have come out of it, but it gets to the point where it's not useful anymore. John mentioned, archetypes. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know. I can't make a judgment, but it could be that they're not useful any longer. And when they aren't, we as a species will find something that is useful, and then we'll use it. It takes us a while to get it online and for it to become the mainstream. But once it does, I think Gapser points this out with the structures of consciousness. At some point, it just doesn't work anymore, and so something else has to take its place. And we're going through that process. So as long as we have events like these cafes where we can get together and we can talk about things that are different from how things are supposed to be or how a lot of people think that they are, I think that provides us all with space to practice, places where we can shore up our own argumentation when dealing with others. I have a wide variety of interests. They've all been touched upon through the course of the discussion this evening, that I'm not unwilling to talk about, given the right group of people to talk about them with. There's some topics I don't bring up in certain circles because it would be self-defeating. So we don't do that. But if we can find others of like mind that we can share ideas with, and sometimes surprisingly, you can be in very odd places and all of a sudden you realize there's 2 or 3 there amongst a larger group who share certain ideals. Well, I think that provides us with footing into reality that allows us to spread these ideas and raise our questions in other contexts other than just these. So I think these are good preparatory sessions where we can try things out otherwise. So I, for one, have certainly appreciated not just the session this evening, but all of the sessions that we've had over the course of the book. This has been a very, for me, rewarding journey, exploring Bernardo's thinking, hearing about how others react to it, getting a feel for things that are important to other people that I know something about. So I wanted to, before we we go our separate ways after this one, since this is our last official session. To thank everyone who's participated for all of the input that they've brought and all of the enthusiasm and all of the questions that they've raised, because it's given me a lot to think about. And I have a lot to chew on from all of this. I hope the rest of you do as well. So if anybody has any final comments, the last 2 cents they want to put in, now is the time to do it. So
I just want to say that this came at a perfect time, given the quarantine. It came at because the idea of the world is changing. It's right in front of my eyes. And this being around everybody here and listening to the different, just the title just seemed to fit what's going on outside in the world, and how not just but us talking about it, but it's happening in the collective, the masses, that so many things are changing and breaking down, and it's causing a lot of high level of anxiety. But as I've been listening to this and participating, it's been very helpful just very helpful reading the book and listening to everybody's idea of how I engage with the rest of the world when I go outside my house. It's kind of helped me stabilize in a certain sense. And that famous quote, "If I could not lose my head, why everybody else is losing theirs," by Kipling. So thank you, everybody, because I really appreciate the genuine, sincere openness that I always appreciate and I come from. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say this is the first group that I've participated on Cosmos Café, and it's a very impressive group, and there are a lot of people with plenty to say, and I've enjoyed it. Look forward to more.
Thank you, Kyle.
Not it.
Appreciated your presence.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, I also would like to say that I hope for more in one way or another. I don't know. I don't know exactly. I have no concrete proposal now for another book or
It's your
topic.
turn. You got to come up with a proposal, Marco.
Okay, I can think about that, but not now.
No, that's I just poking at you. That's all.
Yeah, but okay, but I'm just already doing my synthesis of yoga now.
Yeah.
But I would also participate in another group also, which would continue on this track. I mean, not necessarily physicalism versus materialism, but well, yes, something in that realm. I don't know what is consciousness, or some philosophical issues of modern science, of the philosophy of science. I would be very interested in participating, because I enjoyed also very much these sessions. I think Ed must be praised, because as I understand it was your initiative, and you had this feeling for the book of Kastrup, and
Yeah. Yes.
I
Thank
think
you,
I
Ed.
hope, yeah, and yeah, I'm almost I regret that this is the last session. So I hope that there will be more in the future.
And I'm always impressed with Ed's intro, his post that in which he summarizes all these things, and I think, geez, that is a piece of work. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you all, and thanks Ed for initiating this and for our camaraderie and our willingness to hold the space for each other. I think it's I'm very aware of how the world is changing. I agree. Stephen Wolfram, I just saw him give a 2-hour talk on the history of physics, and he said something very curious to me. He talked about the ether. There was a period where they were talking about the ether, which is a carrier, which was a invisible medium that carried light through it, and that was debunked and deconstructed and rejected. But here's Stephen Wolfram saying, not so fast. He says the radiation. He says the background radiation, which we use to justify the Big Bang metaphor. He says we can't detect background radiation without a rest frame. So it's that rest frame that allows us to detect these very, very subtle vibrations. And I'm just very curious about that frame at rest, or that rest frame through which all these vibrations can be detected. And I think that may be the vast unconscious that many of the psychologists like Jung are trying to track, that can, multiple kinds of vibrations from many different kinds of entities can be passing through and registered by these different sensoriums, but that none of us are reduced to this particular sensorium. But this is a wonderful opportunity, just working with the basic 3 dimensions, to learn a great deal about everything else. So I think this goes back to the perennial philosophy, and I can't remember the name of that guy who basically said that the brain is just a reducing valve that prevents us from tuning into all of these different vibrations. So it's a limitation that we take on intentionally. Aldous Huxley, is that it?
Yeah.
So, and I think this is a very a wonderful idea that I hope that we can all draw upon here. So thanks once again for this rehearsal space. I think of myself as a performer. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a performer. I'm one of these guys who like to sing and dance, but we really require other people who have a different skill set, and the physicists and the teachers, the mentors, the parents of the world who have a different kind of skill set. So I'm really thrilled that we can all come together and bring our unique skills to a shared space like this. Thank you.
Yeah, I love it, Johnny, because I'm your backstage manager.
Yeah, thank you all, and Ed especially for hosting and for facilitating and all those intros. Yes, very good to read. Every time it was good, like, okay, where are we now, and what's very, yeah, and hope I will be following the page if there's something comes up. So very, very grateful for the opportunity, and I've been more passive listening, but learned and could express a few times myself. So thank you.
Nice you were here, Daniel.
Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, then I wish you all a pleasant day, evening, morning, whatever it is, wherever you are. Take care of yourselves and take care of those around you, and stay safe.
Hang 10. Hang 10.
Thank you.
We'll see you around campus, okay?
Okay.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.